Welcome to Giants Weekly, everyone. Very excited today to have Kate Dinon with us. She's the founder of Character, a PR agency based in Melbourne. And today Kate is going to talk through brand storytelling strategies, all the ins and outs of everything that you should know. We will have a bit of time for Q&A at the end, so make sure you submit those questions to the Q&A and upvote your top questions. So a bit of background on Kate before I hand it over. She's a communications and public relations strategist with over 17 years experience, so we're in good hands today. She's worked across startups, technology, government, design and cultural sectors. And prior to owning or starting her firm Character, Kate was the head of corporate communications at a listed industrial company based in Zurich. So Character specialises in communication and media strategy, public relations, brand development, events, government relations. She's got an amazing list of clients. So everyone from PowerShop to Mercedes-Benz Vans, ANZ, Culture Amp, MYOB, Deliveroo, Luxury Escapes, July and ChargeFox. So it's awesome list of clients and very varied, which is great for everyone listening in today. So I'm going to hand it over to Kate now. Make sure you add your questions in the Q&A, and we'll make sure that we jump onto those at the end of the presentation. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Danny. Hi, everybody. Thanks for that lovely intro. I'm going to just share my screen and we'll get started. Super excited about presenting to you guys today, and I've broken one of my own cardinal rules of presenting, and I've tried to shove so much information into 20 minutes. So bear with me. I'm going to go pretty fast, and at the end, look forward to your questions. So as Danny already said, so we work with a lot of different clients, consumer-facing, B2B clients, tech startups, consumer-facing brands, etc. So just to give you a bit of a sense of the fact that we work across all sorts of different businesses, and the techniques I'm going to talk to you guys about today really are relevant to size your business is, and no matter whether you're B2B or B2C. So first, let's just start with a really quick few points on what PR is and what it isn't, because what we're really going to talk about today is how you can be a great storyteller to drive public relations outcomes. And so I think it's helpful just to quickly start with, okay, well, what are we talking about when we talk about PR? Because there's a lot of, I think, misconceptions about what it is and what it can do for you. So it's not creating a press release in corporate speak and then spamming it to every single journalist's detail that you can get your hands on. It's not something that you do as a one-off. So to do good PR, it should be something that you do from day one. And it's a sustained program of work. It's not, let's PR this, or I think it's time for PR. I think you've got to take a bit of a different mindset about public relations to get the most out of it. Contrary to what you might think, I might say it's not something you actually need an agency for or an expensive agency for. There are definitely moments when having an agency would be really helpful, but for the most part, there are many, many things you can do that you actually don't need that support for. It's not a magic bullet for customer acquisition. So I think we often have founders that come to us and say, we just need to get on the project, or we just need to get, I don't know, on TechCrunch. And that might be great and it might be possible, but it's actually not going to just be the magic solution that you need to acquire 10,000 customers on day one. It's not about your ego. So another thing we often, a lot of kind of people come to us and I think that what they think PR is about and what it's actually about is not quite aligned. And so it's not about your profile and your ego. It's about you telling a story to the world that adds to conversation. So what is it? And it is the story you tell the world about your company. So at its most core, it's how you talk about your story, your company story, and how you communicate to your external audiences. And ultimately, like everything else in life, it's actually about relationships. So instead of thinking about building spreadsheets and lists of targets, it's more about thinking through who are the key people for me to build a relationship with that cover my space or that talk to my consumers, and how do I actually go about building a relationship with them over time that's going to serve me. Harry Stebbings actually tweeted this on the weekend, which I thought was really great. So if you don't know who he is, he's the 20-Minute VC podcast host and a VC himself in the UK. And he says, "It amazes me the lack of time founders spend on brand and messaging. For a brand to succeed, it has to stand for something, and it's something I really believe in." And it also, another important point is, as he says at the bottom, test your messaging and iterate and keep testing and keep trying, keep seeing what works, what doesn't work. It should be something that you're constantly evolving. And then this scary screenshot is of a senior journalist from the Australian Financial Review's phone, just showing you the number of unread emails in his inbox, 350,000. It's probably 450,000 by now. And the reason I show that is just to give you a sense of what you're up against if you are just trying that spray and pray approach of slapping a press release together and sending it out to people. In order to cut through, number one, a relationship is valuable. But in lieu of a relationship, actually having news or something truly interesting or a great story is going to be what gets you through and gets you noticed. Okay, so I'm going to show you a great framework for how you can think about your story, and also then some examples of some great brands that have done that. So a lot of you are probably familiar with this. It's Simon Sinek's Golden Circle. If you haven't seen his TED Talk, Start With Why, then highly recommend it. It's short and very good. What his basic theory is that people don't care what you do, or they don't buy what you do, but they buy why you do it. And so to have an evolved storytelling and communications plan for your business, you've got to go from the what you do, to the why you do it. And that's what's going to create emotional connections and cut through for people. So I'm going to give you a few examples. Culture Amp, so they are a client of ours, and but just a great example of this regardless. So the what of Culture Amp, what is it? A people and culture platform that collects data, informs leaders, and allows you to act. Okay, very factual. The how, give people a tool, but also give them education and network and things that they need to do things for themselves in their own company. Okay, getting better. But then the why is to make a better world of work for 100 million people. So that is the mission that drives everyone at Culture Amp, that drives the way they communicate and the way they tell stories, and to create an emotional connection with customers, but also with media. So a great example of being mission-led and that can lead to media outcomes. So this is just from last week. Didier, who's the co-founder and CEO of Culture Amp, wrote a really heartfelt blog post where he talked about Black Lives Matter and what that means for Culture Amp, what they're doing as an organisation internally, and what their commitment is to addressing the Black Lives Matter movement. And so he posted that, and within a couple of hours, that had been picked up, because it was also tweeted out through his Twitter account, that had been picked up by a couple of different media outlets. So just showing you how a really great blog post that's quite mission-led or values-led can actually translate into news coverage, and that also was included in the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age as well, in print and online. Another great example, so when you have the chance to speak, so this is an example of Didier speaking at PauseFest earlier this year, back when we could do that stuff. And he had used his keynote not to talk about his product, but to talk about why culture matters. And so he spoke for 10, 15 minutes. And I don't think he mentioned the product once. It's about the mission, about the why they do what they do. And speaking in, like a great storyteller does, speaking in really plain language and with a lot of emotion, which I'll come to in a minute too. An example of how you can bring your mission into news announcements. So this is the announcement from when Culture Amp did their Series E last year, which took them past $1 billion Australian dollars in valuation, sorry. And obviously that's newsworthy in itself, but the reason I'm showing this is because when Didier spoke to the journalist, what he talked about wasn't the money, So he said it will be a nice thing when it happens, talking about reaching 100 million ARR. But he says, because it's a round number and I'm a storyteller, but we're now more anchored on 100 million people than 100 million. So on that impacting 100 million people. Even with 1 billion in revenue, that's a goal, not because of the money, but because it's a measure of how we're helping our customers, how many problems we're solving for people, and how we're making a dent in the world. And so you can just see that every time you get the opportunity to tell your story, it's the thing that will cut through. I mean, that might have been a 30-minute conversation, and from that, 3 quotes might make the article. And you can see that 2 of the quotes that did are quite mission focused. Another example, Adore Beauty. So Adore is in the what? Australia's longest running online beauty store. The how, it's democratizing beauty. And so the how, what makes them different, what sets them apart is they give you honest, uncensored perspectives on all the products and treat you like a normal person. But the why is that beauty is about confidence. We want you to feel confident every day. We want to give you the empowering beauty shopping experience that you deserve. So you can see just from the what to the why, how much more you want to lean in and understand more about that company and how much more that story is likely to stay with you and resonate with customers. Another great way, storytelling tool at your disposal is your founder story, your own personal story. And so this is Kate's. Kate's the founder of Adore Beauty. And the story is that when she was 21, she started this online beauty business from her garage with money borrowed from her boyfriend's father. She tells the stories of going to see some of the big beauty brands to try and get them on the platform and basically having the door slammed in her face. And that story you can see, that story you can see translates, that's a human story. And so you can see that that really cuts through, and you'll see if you happen to follow any of the media about Adore Beauty, you will see that that founder origin story gets repeated in, so many of the articles that are written about Kate, because it's human and it's real, and it allows you to form an emotional connection. Another great thing you can do that anyone can do is be a good human. And so Kate, when COVID broke out, she decided to set up a Slack channel for e-commerce leaders in Australia to basically strategize, share information, talk about what's working, what's not working, how you're handling shipping, how you're handling different problems. And so she did that. I think she had about 150 people sign up in a couple of days of e-commerce leaders. And again, the media pick up on these sorts of things. So the media pick up on the fact that Kate has just off her own bat decided to pull this together. And I think that probably led to 3 or 4 stories just in itself. Final example I'm going to give you is from Up. So Up, what is it? It's a digital bank. Hopefully lots of people watching on the call are customers. The how of Up is it's a digital bank that helps you organise your money and simplify your life. But the why is Up exists to take people from a place where money is a cause of stress and anxiety to a happier place where they feel empowered and in control of their finances. And so Up, for anyone that knows it, is actually a really incredible product. And so when they first launched, the product alone was quite newsworthy because it's so good. The onboarding, sign-up experience, the UX, the whole thing, the functionality, the speed at which they get product updates to market. But what really started to happen is that you can kind of max out on product being a great product. You get a certain number of customers, early adopters, but then you really, if you want to actually go from niche cool to mainstream cool, you really need to start trying to connect with a bigger message. And so what they're now really focusing on is what's the why behind Up, and why should people believe? Why should people switch from one of the big 4 banks to a neobank? So a great example of what any company can do is actually do good customer monthly newsletters, good EDMs. So Up's monthly EDM is legitimately the best brand email you will ever get. So if you're not a customer, I've actually managed to get them to put the last 10 months of the newsletters online. So I've got all the links and I'll somehow share it. I don't know, we'll talk to Danny and see what we can do about that. But I would really encourage anyone to have a read and see how you can actually be really human with your customers, but also providing newsworthy information. And so this is from the May update. One thing that Up has access to obviously is spending data at an anonymised aggregated level. And so they ran the numbers on how people, and the median age of an Up customer is 19. So they really understand how young people are spending money. And so they decided to pull the data together and just see what are the major changes due to coronavirus. And one of the main, the biggest stats was that spending on apps and gaming was up 200%. And so they actually went through quite a lot of other spending categories as well. But what then happened was, oops, sorry, keep doing that, was the day after the newsletter went out, we got an email from savings.com.au, which is one of the core outlets that covers Up, from the journo, who said, hey, how are you? I was just reading the May update and I found this insights data really newsworthy. I have some questions for you. You know, can you get this back to us? And then later that day, that turned into a story. And so the reason I show you all these examples is because these are things that really any brand can do. And they're ways that you can connect your story and your purpose to good storytelling through your own channels that can then lead to generating some good public relations outcomes. So how do you do it? Well, know what your why is, and get your story right. So what's your version of this golden circle? Can you articulate that? You know, what's your 1 or 2 sentences on your why, your how, and your what? And then how do you actually evolve the way you tell your story to include the why? When you are telling stories, think about it like any great storyteller thinks about a story. You know, stories have 3 acts. They have a setup, they have a conflict or a confrontation, and they have a resolution. Solution, you know, the time-honoured problem and solution storytelling method. You'd be surprised once you get into the hang of telling stories in that way, how well those stories actually resonate with people, especially if you can insert your own personal anecdotes along the way. Another thing you need to do is just know the moments in the life cycle of your business when you're actually newsworthy. You're not newsworthy all the time. So what are some of those moments? This is not scientific. This is just me thinking through some of the more common questions that we get asked, but you're probably newsworthy if you've raised money, if you have hired someone with a high profile, or if you've taken on a really high profile investor, if you have some really unique data that's proprietary to you that advances a really interesting story, or takes a story in a different direction. And that kind of links to the last point. If you have a controversial take or just a new take on a topical subject, if you just see something a different way and you can articulate why, that can be really newsworthy. You might be newsworthy if you sign a big name customer, if you enter a new market, or just on the basis of your founder story alone. But you're probably not going to be newsworthy if you launch a product, if you win an award, if you've done a customer case study. So I think the key is just really making sure that you capitalize on the moments in the life cycle of your business where you are more naturally newsworthy, and make sure you try and take advantage of those. And finally, have a unique point of view and actually say something. That's the key. You know, I don't know why people feel like they have to resort to talking like an automaton when they start talking about their story, or when they start talking about a news announcement. Just talk like you normally talk, and be prepared to actually say things of interest. And a great example of that, I think, is everyone in the world has watched this doco in the last month or so, but is from the Jordan doco. My personal favourite part of the whole thing was his I'm Back media release. And that to me just shows a way of your brand, your personality in a more, I guess, traditional framework of a press release, but doing it with the confidence and the bravado and in a way that's on brand for you. And that to me was a great example of someone doing that. So to close, I know I've only got sort of 1 more minute. I actually asked Kate from Adore, Didier from Culture Amp, and Dom from Up what their like couple of nuggets on storytelling are, so I can share them with you guys. So Kate, sorry for the WhatsApp grab, but I thought it was good to just do it in a kind of authentic way. Kate's tips, so be real. Good storytelling includes your mistakes, the disasters and the struggles, not just the shiny bits. Find a technique to get past feeling nervous or embarrassed, and Kate finds it useful to think of it as her playing a role when she speaks. And of course, practice, keep practicing. Didier thinks that storytelling is one of the most valuable skills you can learn. And the best way to do that is to actually watch great storytellers and understand the techniques and the tricks that they use. Pacing, repetition, and I think a really great tip that he gives here that everyone can use is start by describing where you were, how you felt in a really specific way. And so he gives an example. It was late on a Wednesday, it was cold, I was shivering, trying not to cry when I ... and you kind of want to hear the end of that story. And then his final tip was be okay with letting emotion into your voice. And a hack that he thinks about for that is reading poetry. And he's given it a great reference if anyone wants to have a read of it, Poems That Make Grown Men Cry, and to just read those out loud and sort of practice letting emotion seep into your voice. I think everyone will know the feeling of watching someone present in a monotone voice, and how boring that is and how little of it stays with you. So I think that's a really good practical tip that anyone can grab onto. And then Dom gave me a bit of an essay. It wasn't a WhatsApp, but his tips were great. So listening, so make sure that you adapt your story for the context. People remember the emotional feeling, not the story itself. And so he's also referenced the golden circle, the Simon Sinek start with why model that we've talked about. Know your ending before you begin. Have a surprising twist, emotional, shocking, comedic. Have a great beginning to capture your audience and have a good ending to leave them wanting more. His next point is similar to Didier's point. So less is more, but the small things are important. So what are those small, specific, vivid details about your story that let the listener really feel like they're part of the story with you? Make it personal. Don't forget the rule of 3. So every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And don't forget the rule of 7 either. People need to hear things 7 times before it sinks in. So keep that in mind when you're presenting, and don't be afraid to repeat yourself. And with that, I am ready for questions.
Thank you so much. We can take it off the share screen now. So sorry to everyone who wasn't able to join us at the beginning. We have recorded the session, so I'm going to send it around to everyone to make sure that you don't miss anything. But we do have a few questions for Kate. So the first one is, how do you go about building relationships with media, and how do you identify, who you should go to first and who you should build those relationships with?
Okay, I'll tackle the second bit first. So I think that the best and quickest way to figure out who to build a relationship with is to just look at a competitor, someone that's probably paid for PR, and look at all the coverage that they've achieved, media coverage. So Google News is your friend, and just see who all the journalists are that have covered them. That is the quickest way to hack together a media list that is going to be relevant. And then in terms of building relationships, just like you would with anyone else, reach out, introduce yourself, short email, let the journalist know who you are, what you're doing, and a couple of bullet points about your views or why what you're doing is newsworthy, and say, oh, look, I'm happy to talk to you anytime if I can be helpful, like you would when you're starting a relationship with anyone. So just like any other human.
If it's your very first interview, how do you go about approaching that? Are there any tips or tricks that you have?
I would say prepare really, really well for the first one. So really practice telling your story. Usually the first question from the journalist will be, tell me about tell me about you. They will start with a really open-ended question so that they can also figure out what other avenues might they want to continue questioning you on. So really think through what that quick, 2-3 minute version of your story is. And then another thing I recommend to all the people we work with is just think about what's the one-liner that you want to be remembered from that interview, and make sure you get that in a relevant way. But that's a really good trick, because you want to try and sort of reverse engineer what you want the end story to be. And so you've got to give the journalist the information to work with.
So we have a question here. You mentioned the point of having a point of view and not being afraid to say it. Is this the case even if it's against the trend or against the general way of thinking?
I think that's totally fine. I think if that is your belief, and if what you're doing is somehow linked to that belief, so it's relevant to your business, then I don't see any problem with that, so long as you're prepared to back it up and you're prepared to enter into an intelligent debate about it, which you may then need to do.
Okay, I have a very specific question here. In terms of press and media, as the storytelling techniques, are they the same for a book release? So does this apply to all types of press and media?
So I've never done a book release, but I can't see why it would be any different, because ultimately the reason you're telling stories is to form an emotional connection, and that's going to be useful no matter who you're telling your story to.
Awesome. Can you recommend any free places to find potential stories that you can pitch to? So we have Harrow and Source Bottle here.
Yeah, Source Bottle's probably the main one. I think Twitter is probably honestly the best place. If you understand who your key publications and journalists are, follow them all. And it's not uncommon for them to do a call out on social media when they are trying to do a roundup story where they want to get a few different points of view. And also it just means that you will know what's on their mind, and therefore you might have an idea for something that can contribute to a story that they're writing. It doesn't even have to be about you necessarily. It can be about something related to what you're doing that's in the news, and you might have a great point of view. So I actually think Twitter is the most valuable tool for understanding what journalists are thinking about, but also to communicate with them quickly, which is what they like.
So you've mentioned newsletters. How often should you send out your newsletters?
I think it depends I honestly think that depends on what you're selling, and what the frequency of purchase is for your customers, what your product is. I don't think that there is a one-size-fits-all answer to that question, unfortunately. Up sends a monthly EDM, I think from your bank. You probably don't want to hear from them every week, but you might be happy to hear from an e-commerce fashion retailer every week. So I really think it depends, and I think you should listen to your customer and understand what they want.
So we have a question about international press. So Forbes is mentioned here. Are there any PR agencies which could help out with that? Or is that essentially what PR agencies would help with? I think you're asking.
To get coverage in Forbes?
Yeah.
I think absolutely. I mean, I think a good, I would just sort of try and figure out which companies have had good coverage and see if you can backwards engineer, which agency placed it. And talk to them. I mean, that's one way. Another way is just to work with any good agency on a pitch, and a great pitch will cut through, but of course a relationship is going to give you more chance of success.
And there's no reason why you can't develop that relationship yourself as well if you don't have the budget for an agency.
Absolutely. Yep.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This has been wonderful, and we will make sure that everyone who has missed out on the beginning, we will send it through to all of you. So thank you so much, Kate. That was awesome. I'll also send around Kate's details to all of you in case you want to get in touch with her. Next week, we have Scaling Marketplaces with Tim Fung, the co-founder and CEO of Airtasker. So that's going to be an awesome episode. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.